Hello. Good evening. Welcome to the Indy NET Consortium. How many people are new here? Sweet. Welcome. So tonight we've got a great presentation by Kyle Burns on Azure DevOps. Very excited about this. This is part of our continuing series on Azure DevOps. So this is part 2 of 2. We'll see if we should maybe do some more if you want to learn more things. So super excited about that. Coming up next month are the lightning talks. Is anyone excited about doing a lightning talk? Is anyone going to do one? Anyone not know what a lightning talk is? Okay, anyone else? Okay. So a lightning talk is where you come up with a topic and you talk about it for 5-10 minutes, nothing big, yeah. Just come on up, something you're interested in, and talk about it. So you don't have to tell us ahead of time. The way it works is that we'll put a whiteboard up, you'll just write down a topic, and then you present. Very simple. Yay. So this came by suggestion. So this is the second time we're doing it. Interesting thing, a lot of people wanted it, and then when we did it, like 11 people showed up. So we're going to try it one more time, and we're going to see. Because a lot of people wanted it, but apparently no one wants to talk. So this is a great way to deal with public speaking issues. Because it's not quite public, and you've got peers, and developers never judge. Thank you, thank you. I'm here till Thursday. Do we have any shirts left, or is it just a small? Oh, there's a small and a medium left, I think. So if you didn't get a shirt, there are shirts still. I think it's a small and a medium.
Small and double X.
A small and a double extra large. Double extra large?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
So if you you really want a shirt or a nightgown, and apparently they're all for men because it says man on the back. Or on the neck. I don't get that. Anyway, so I hope we see you next month with some great ideas for topics. If not, that's okay too. You just stuck with us. It's okay. Wonderful. So, is anyone looking for a job? Ooh, all those people are looking for a job. Is anyone offering jobs? Hey, Brent's got jobs to offer. Anyone else offering jobs? No? Okay, so everyone get Brent.
Yeah.
So, do you have any details?
I would definitely share more details outside of this. Obviously, we want to make this about how the presentation.
Oh, sure.
But I do have a couple clients here in Indianapolis who are looking for .NET developers, one of which is a little bit different. For the first 6 months, you'll have to unfortunately do automated testing, which I know isn't everybody's favorite thing to do in the world. But after the 6 months, you would go into production code environment. And Tim's team, their solutions, is also looking for a senior level .NET tech lead as well for a major client in Indianapolis downtown that we definitely use the help out with. So I put my cards over there on the table, and I know I messaged probably a majority of you in the room tonight, but if anybody wants to get with me or outside of here or whatever, definitely get with me and we'll see what we can do.
Yay.
And just to turn that around a little bit on you, Brent, about the part about the automated testing, I will say if you're starting out in your career and you have that opportunity to work where you're going to be able to focus on automated testing. Automated testing is the way quality software is built, right? And so that's a great way to start off your career with your mindset right and really build on a solid foundation from there. So I wouldn't necessarily view it as a negative. Okay. I would use it as a huge positive that some places focused enough on automated testing to provide an opportunity for somebody to do that.
Great. I'm so looking at it that way from a positive outlook, right?
Yeah.
Look
Look at all the things we're learning today. There we go.
So, special thanks to our sponsors. We've got Theoris, yay. We've got 1150 Academy. Theoris brought the pizza. Woo! 1150 Academy. How many people here with 1150 Academy or were? Ah, sweet. There we go. Awesome. We've got Ozcode, which I love. Everyone's heard me talk about Ozcode. Great software. If you want to try it out. I think there's a free trial, and we'll be giving away one free subscription to that tonight. So I'll make sure to hand out the tickets, and you'll be all set. And then, of course, we've got Launch Fishers, so thanks to them because they give us this awesome room. Woohoo! Afterwards, we usually get beer. How many people are looking to get beer tonight? Okay, cool. You got to make sure because last time 4-Day Ray was like super busy and we had to find somewhere else to go. So I tried reserving a seat. That did not work, so we ended up at Chat and Tap. Cool. Then Kyle, please, looking forward to this presentation. We will be recording it. So did anyone watch the recording of the previous one? Did anyone not know that we record these? Okay, so in the meetup, generally within a day or two after the meetup occurs, not that I'm discouraging you from attending, but if you have a chance to meet, or if you do end up missing one, as long as we have permission from the speaker, we do end up putting a video up. So you can catch up on the ones you've missed. So that's a new thing. So if you have feedback on that, please let us know. It's just being recorded. It's not some professional videographer. So anyway, cool. Well, without further ado, Kyle Burns.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Get this out of the way. Hold on. You scoot that over. And more power. Yay.
Hi everyone, my name is Kyle Burns. I'm a Senior Cloud Solution Architect with Microsoft. I work in the Customer Success Unit out of the Indianapolis office. Essentially my job is, I have a disciplinary focus on Azure application development. So I'm focused on helping customers understand how they can build applications and deploy those applications to run them successfully in the cloud. Got about 20 years of application development experience as a professional developer now, mostly focused on the Microsoft stack. So we've seen a lot of changes over the years, and I'm here today to really talk with you about a product that we have that's unfortunately named Azure Devops. Because the first thing we talk about when we talk about DevOps is DevOps isn't a person, it's not an organizational, and it's not a tool. Yet we named our tool Azure DevOps. Unfortunate marketing thing, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it's really an awesome suite of tools. And I'm going to go on because I'm here as a member of the .NET community today, right? I am not here as a solution architect Microsoft employee. I'm here as a member of the .NET Consortium. I'm focused on building and delivering great .NET software. The things that I'm going to talk to you about today, the tooling that we're looking at happens to be Azure DevOps. The important thing is the practices that we talk about, they can be employed on many different tools, right? Pick your favorite stack, and you're going to find some fine tools in the marketplace to support behaviors and practices that are going to help you be successful delivering software. Now, again, we're going to look at those in the context of Azure DevOps, but I wanted to make sure that we're crystal clear before we jump in, that more important than which tools you use to do these things in are that you're doing them at all, okay? Now, who loves PowerPoints? Really? I am a recovering PowerPointaholic. And when I was getting ready to start working on this presentation, the first thing I did was I sat down and I pulled up PowerPoint. I said, okay, which slides am I going to do first? And I caught myself. And I said, no, you know what? I'm not going to do any slides. This really, I want this to be an interactive journey through Azure DevOps, through some of the capabilities that are offered within the tool set, and also some of the why we do things. We're going to take a look at things from the very simple and look at them in the context of a single application. And then we're going to move on and look a little bit about how Microsoft's engineering group uses this to manage their own development work at scale. So we're going to pull up Microsoft's instance of Azure DevOps and take a look at what the Microsoft team is doing inside the tool. Sound good? Great. The other thing that I want to make sure, as far as ground rules before we start, my intention is for this to be as interactive a session as you guys want it to be, right? So please stop and ask questions if you have questions. Please feel free to make this as conversational as you'd like. I can certainly spend the time speaking at you, but I would much rather have a dialogue with you and make sure that we're taking advantage of the fact that there's no PowerPoint deck to conform to, and instead take this where you guys need it to go. All right? Great. So who's familiar with Visual Studio? Hopefully every can comes up, right? Good. Any VS Code users? Okay. Great. So some VS Code users. Anybody work just in VS Code and not Visual Studio? You don't do Xamarin and VS Code, do you?
I mean, mostly been working in it lately.
What's that?
Mostly been working in it lately.
Mostly working in it lately? Okay, good. So making that transition. How many are familiar with right-click publish? Right? Visual Studio. I can bring up a web application. I'll right-click publish. It doesn't matter where that thing needs to be deployed. It can be an IIS server on-prem. It can be just some drop folder. It can be an Azure cloud service. But man, that'll get it there. Right? Pretty cool for demos. Awesome for demos. Yeah. And that's the best use of that particular tool, right? What kind of problems do we run into when we use this tool? When we use right-click publish for professional development work? Who can think of a problem we might run into?
The sheer amount of data that you might be having to use.
Okay, using a lot of data.
There's no quality gateway.
No quality gateway, right? How do I know that what's going up there is okay? Right? What else?
There might be issues with the release.
Might be issues with the release. Okay.
Developers might not want access to be able to push up the production.
That's right. Your developers have to get access to production, or do you give your operations folk a copy of Visual Studio? I've seen places do that too, right? And you don't want to put Visual Studio in the hands of somebody who's not a developer, right? What else? How do you know what code's running on the server when it comes time to debug a production problem?
Well, you just tag the release.
Just tag the no. I did a right-click publish.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I did a right-click publish. You can't do that. You have to remember that, right? I have to remember to back it up, or I have to hope I back it up. And invariably, in organizations that live on right-click publish, you end up with these really weird processes for deployment. I get the latest version of the code, I open up this file, I make these 3 changes, and then I publish it. And I don't check it in, because I just know that I need to make those changes, but only when I'm doing the release build. Anybody ever hear a process like that? Who's been forced to execute a process like that? Yeah, a couple hands going up. It's painful. Yes?
Silly question.
Uh-huh.
Does right-click publish only work with Microsoft Azure?
No. It can run with, your target can be an on-premise IIS server. It can be an FTP drop folder, right? Number of various publishing targets. I believe, and don't quote me on this, we may have an extensibility model that allows you to add additional targets.
Okay.
Which would be useful with potentially like a .NET Core app, because they're not locked to just the Windows platform either, right? So, but that, but most commonly, you're going to see it with the target being a on-prem IIS server or an Azure web application server.
Okay.
So if we should do right-click publish, what should we do? First off, there we go. We get our screen back.
Pass your code through your pipeline?
What's that?
Pass your code through your pipeline?
Absolutely. Last month, you guys got to hear about Azure Devops from my colleague Eric Moore, and there are a number of different subsections within feature areas within Azure DevOps, right? And he gave you a high level overview of most of those feature areas. Today, we're going to focus mainly on a feature set called pipelines. Now, pipelines consists of really two major areas and then some supporting areas below that, right? And that's build and release. Now, build and release pipelines are semantically different, but functionally the same, right? Because a pipeline is just a way of orchestrating tasks that need to be done with code, right? And that a different thing is going to trigger a build potentially than a thing that will trigger a release, right? The initial cuts of Azure DevOps, or at the time it was called Visual Studio Online, your build, right, pipelines was called build and release, right? And typically you saw a lot of projects in there where you'd have a single job, and that single job said, build my code, run the test, and deploy it to a server, right? And do that for dev. Now I've got a dev pipeline, I've got a QA pipeline, I've got a prod pipeline. That approach has changed a little bit over the years, and this is one of the reasons why we see a distinction between build pipelines and release pipelines, because now the industry has taken a little bit a different view on how that should be handled. And the view that is taken, and I happen to share, is if I can, I want to build something exactly once. I want to produce a package that I can take and I can put it on a server and I can run it in a certain configuration and I can guarantee that it works through my testing. And then I can take that same thing that I know works and I can move it into a different environment with a different configuration. If it's broken, what's my problem?
The environment.
What's that?
Rolling back.
Oh, no, what's my problem, right? If I take this thing that I tested and guaranteed worked, and I pick it up and I set it down with a different configuration, and it doesn't work, what's my problem?
It's environment.
My configuration. Because my configuration is the only thing that's changed, right? Now, it could be something in the environment on the configuration. Maybe I'm missing a database server, right? And by the way, that app that we just looked at, if I had done the right-click publish, it wouldn't have run because I would have been missing a database server, right? Well, little things like that, right? So we make use of a build pipeline to produce the thing that is going to be the executable code. Jump back over here. Right, got it to the wrong project. In its most simplest form, a build pipeline is going to have a couple of different subsections that it can get broken into. Those typically compose of what we call stages. Now, stages very often end up being analogous to environments, right? A stage is going to have the ability to gate, whether it be a manual approval, whether it be waiting for an event to happen before the stage gets entered. And then within the stage, then you have the ability to have multiple phases. Those phases are otherwise known as jobs, right? And jobs can come in a couple different flavors. There can be a job that's run by an agent. Now, an agent in Azure DevOps is software that has the necessary code on it to run jobs, right, at the end of the day. But you can also have an agentless job. Agentless jobs are used for doing things like waiting for a webhook, a manual approval step, right? I might have an agentless job in the middle of a complex build that says, I need a person to go read a runbook and execute a series of steps and say, okay, I've done those things because there was something that couldn't be automated. Can we automate everything? No, we can't automate everything. There's going to be some things that we can't automate, or we could automate, but they simply don't make sense financially, right? Because maybe you can automate everything if you give an unlimited time and money, right? We don't usually have unlimited time or money, and so we may get as close as we possibly can and say this one thing over here just doesn't make sense to automate. We're not going to automate that yet, but we're also not going to allow the fact that there's something we can't automate keep us from doing anything at all, right? So in this particular case, we're doing a NuGet restore on this solution that I showed you when we started. We're executing Visual Studio build, making it with the package command. We're executing unit tests, and we're copying files and publishing the artifact. Once we've published that artifact, now it's ready to be picked up by a release pipeline. Now, to me, one of the most important pieces that makes this automation make sense is the test assembly step, right? And the reason for that is automation does two things. It makes us repeatable and it makes us fast, right? Can I move fast without automation? Absolutely. I can open up folders side by side and drag stuff and hope I remember to edit the config file very quickly, right? But it introduces that variability that isn't present if I can run a script. What happens if my script's wrong? Well, I fixed my script once, right? Yeah, my deployment was messed up. People got mad. There were bugs, and maybe even I was worried about my job, right? But at the end of the day, we finally sweat it through. We got the app up and running. We figured out what we did wrong. I tweaked the script, and the next time I deploy, I know it's going to be golden because we fixed the script, right? So that automation enables that push through, and it makes us want to move faster because now we're automating it. What it doesn't do is prove that software works, and it doesn't prove that we didn't necessarily break something that already worked, right? And that's where unit testing comes in. Anybody regularly unit test? A couple hands, okay. Anybody in the I hate unit tests crowd? No? Okay. Right. Who thinks unit tests can help prove that software works? A lot of hands going up. I'd have to disagree with you.
A little bit.
I'd have to disagree with you. And the reason why I would have to disagree with you is because inherently a unit test doesn't really prove that something works.
Well, it's not just unit testing.
They prove that something has produced a positive result, right? Now, functional testing, acceptance testing, in conjunction with unit testing, right? The unit testing for me is more for the next time I'm going to change that software, right? Because if I put a piece of software into production that said, let's say I've got 95% coverage on my unit tests, and it went through a vigorous cycle of acceptance, QA, testing, and I've got a high confidence that when that went into production, it worked. Now I go and I make a change in the software. Right? What's my confidence level if I maintain 95% coverage on those changes? What's my confidence level that I managed to not break anything that worked before? It should be pretty high.
Should be pretty high.
pretty high, right? And so the unit tests I view as change detectors. Unit tests for me are an indication that I did not introduce unanticipated change into the software that I'm changing. And they allow me to confidently move quick. And the funny thing is, how many talk with business? How many of you guys talk with your business folks about unit tests and coverage? They don't bother me with that stuff. That's developer stuff, right? How many of your business stakeholders do you think would actually, if they could be made to realize that that's a confidence measure that you didn't break something? How many do you think would be willing to demand high coverage from you if they just understood that that's there to build their confidence, right? I've had that conversation with business stakeholders at the VP level in financial institutions, and those folks don't want to hear anything about the technology, right? And they have that explained, and they say, well, of course I want you to do it. Great, demand it of me, please. Because when you demand it of me, it takes away the excuse, oh, but we're in too much of a hurry, right? So that, to me, the fact that testing is in here, baked in, is the critical piece that must be in place. So if I'm talking about, hey, I want to start automating delivery, and I haven't started unit testing, stop. You're working on the wrong thing. Let's at the very least get to the point where we understand what our current coverage is. We have tests, right? Where do you start? Well, you start with the first step, right? I've worked with groups that said, you know what? We don't do unit tests, we get that they're good, but we didn't start that way. We've got 100,000 lines of code, and we just can't go put unit tests on it all, so why bother? Right? Start with one test. Right? Test the change you're about to make right now. Right? And then the next change, test that too. And come up with an agreement, and you're going to see when we go into the engineering, when we take a look at pull requests in the engineering, right? There's measurement of code coverage. What was the code coverage? What's the code coverage of the solution? And what's the code coverage of the code that was changed? Great. We can't go boil the ocean and fix it all today, but we can make the decision that it's not going to get any worse. And if teams are holding themselves and each other to that accountability and saying, no, it's not going to get any worse, not on our watch, then great. Every time I turn in code, it's going to either get better or stay the same, or we're not going to accept pull requests, right? Can somebody game that system with numbers? Yeah, they can go write a unit test for something other than the line of code that they're changing, right? Did it break the intent? Yeah, it broke the spirit of the rule. Is your coverage better?
You
Yeah.
hope so.
Yeah. So I'm kind of okay with it, right? I'm kind of okay with that. I would much rather that the test be written for the code that's being changed right now, right? Because that's going to be more aligned to the goals of the team, and it's going to produce more value. But at least when they were trying to cheat the system, they made it a little better.
Yeah.
Right? So once a build finishes, it publishes its artifact. And let me jump back into the build real quick, because
You might want to zoom in a little
thank
bit.
you. Right. The build, when they finish, it creates a zip file that you can download to pull down. You can pull down and you can examine the zip file. You can look at the contents. You can actually take a look at them in place within Azure DevOps to understand what the file contents are. This is very important when you're first starting working with it, because sometimes when you're learning to work with Azure DevOps, the fact that the build is running on a different machine and you're having to inspect the output of that build instead of being able to sit there and inspect the file system of your local machine can be a little bit daunting, right? And there's ways even around that, because right now we're talking about build agents that are hosted in the cloud. We talked about jobs that are run without agents at all. The type of agents that we didn't talk about yet are agents that are running on your machine, right? Whether that be a server on your network or your own development workstation. And I have a lot of colleagues who, when they're working with new technologies, and this is normally not something that you deal with on a regular basis, right? I'm learning how to build something of a type that I've not had to build before. And so I need to do some exploratory work to understand how things work. I need to hack it a little bit. I need to take it apart and understand how it works. My colleague actually introduced me to this idea just a couple weeks ago that had never occurred to me, which was, hey, run a build agent on your local machine. And then now that you've got the build agent running on your local machine, you point your agent job at that, and now everything's running on your machine. You have access to the file system, and you can realize, oh, wait a minute, when I was putting in the reference to a folder path, I missed traversing up one level when I was doing .. / right? Those are things that you can do to help get a better understanding of what's happening and grok that more, okay? Now, the reason why that drop artifact is important is because it becomes the thing that's going to get picked up by the release pipeline, right? And so in this release pipeline, we've got this particular case, and by the way, I'm not a huge fan of the way that this pipeline's put together, because they essentially have a single stage, which is deploy the code, right? And that single stage then goes into multiple environments. Now, for something as simple as, hey, just a web app, it might be okay, right? As we start to add complexity, I like to make sure that I'm using a stage to be analogous to an environment, because I'm a folders guy. I like putting things into folders and having them nicely arranged and things grouped together where I want them to group. And when I have a giant everything group, to me, that's not a group at all. And it takes away the opportunity for a group. Yes?
Isn't that showing though that it's gated? That you have to approve from dev to QA and then QA to production?
You know what, you're right. I looked at that wrong. Those are multiple stages.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
I was worried there, yeah.
I was reading it wrong. My apologies there. Yeah, you're right. And that's a good point to walk into. So within the stage, there are two tasks in the dev stage, right? The first task, who's familiar with Azure? Azure, so okay, a lot of at least partially folks with a little familiarity. Have you heard of what's called ARM templates? Okay, a couple hands. ARM templates is essentially what's called a desired state configuration, right? And what the desired state configuration means is I want to declare what I want my infrastructure to look like when the tool runs, right? I want an app server and a database server, and I want the database server to have this configuration and the app server to have this configuration. And I don't care, desired state engine, what you need to do to make it look like that, right? That's what ARM template's built around. And so the first step in this particular stage is, it says Azure deployment, and in the terminology of Azure, it is considered a deployment, it's created a deployment. I prefer to refer to it as asserting a configuration though, right? Because if the configuration, if the target resource group in Azure already has the configuration that I want, well, that deployment's not going to deploy anything. It's going to look at the state of that resource group, and it's going to say, is it the way that this template says it should be? Yes, nothing to do here, moving along, right? And so they call it a deployment. I think of it more logically as an assertion, right? And so in many cases, this deployment is only ever going to do anything once, right? And that's that initial. Now, if I were to go out to Azure and delete my resource group, then the next time I run this pipeline, it's going to put it back, and it's going to deploy the code to it. And that becomes an amazing tool for things like disaster recovery, right? What is my disaster recovery scenario, right? How do I handle disasters? Well, I simply redeploy the artifact that's supposed to be in production, right? That makes a great DR story and is a lot better than tracking the backups, right? Now, you still have to back up your data, right? But as far as your application and your configuration, this can take you a long way towards disaster recovery. And once I've got my template asserted and my resource group has the resources that it needs to have, then I'm going to go ahead and use a task that's built that comes out of the box with Azure pipelines to deploy it. Now, when I talk about out of the box tasks, that's where things start to get really cool, right? And the reason why is because if we take a look, who does Android development? One? Only one? Okay.
That includes Xamarin.
Anybody, any Xamarin developers? Okay, one, two. Okay, there you go. Hey.
See?
Yeah. Right. The surface that we have to compose these orchestrations is pretty amazing. When I take a look and scroll through, I can just by dragging on a task, I can take a packaged app and deploy it into Azure. Right? I need something that I need some command line access. Maybe I need to set configurations. Maybe I need to set some keys or something like that. Great, drag a CLI command on there, and I can inject into the middle of my pipeline some command line, some scripts. Databases, right? Deploy Azure Functions. Deploy modules to Azure IoT Edge, sitting out so that it can push to edge devices in an IoT solution, right? Just the variety. I might trigger an alert, Azure Monitor, right? I've got something in my code where I'm going to test for a specific type of situation, right? Maybe I'm going to take bash command after I deploy my app service. I'm going to deploy a bash command, do a curl on a URL, make sure it gives me a 200 response code, and if it doesn't, then I'm going to trigger an Azure Monitor alert so that operations can go take a look and fix something, right? Or better yet, maybe I'm gonna take that bash script, do a curl. If I don't get a 200 back, fine. I'll go ahead and roll back and abort, right? Those types of things can all be brought into it. Now, like I said, this is a pretty simple deployment, and that's because I wanted to make sure that it was easy to see, right? In this particular case, I've got a pull request put in. Product search is broken. Right? People noticed, and it's being reported as something that's affecting sales. Why is it affecting sales?
People can't search for products.
People can't search for your products. You're not gonna sell anything, right? And so when I come out to the portal, jump out to the Azure portal real quick here.
Azure portal on gigabit.
Yes. There we go. You can see my really busy e-commerce site from a traffic perspective. And the reason it's so busy is because it's kind of buggy. And in this case, if I search for headlight, I get back a result that says there's my headlight, right? But if I search for headlights, nothing back now. We saw both of those results should have come back this time. And the developer who picked up this particular pull request, he pretty quickly got to the point where he realized that my product search is kind of messed up. And what's messed up with it? Back to the pull request. We can see what changes the developer made here in the portal. And what we see is in this completely abhorred depluralized logic, right? This syntax error, I guarantee you, is not the only problem with this method. But there's a really bad logic error here, right? And that logic error, notice, says if the query ends with ES, then it's going to start take the substring from 0 to the length of the string minus 1, right? Makes sense, right? I'm gonna chop off the last 2 letters. But somebody was in a hurry when they did the else if here, and if it just ends with S, they started the substring at 1 instead of 0.
Ship it.
Right? So what's that gonna do?
Add lights.
What's that?
It's gonna chop off the H, right?
Well, no, so the way that the substring function works, what's gonna happen on string.substring if you feed it indexes that it can't satisfy? What's that?
Out of bounds exception?
Yeah, you're gonna get an out of bounds exception, right? And the other really cool thing that whoever wrote this awesome code did was up here in the code that calls depluralize, they said, some architect told me I have to put a try catch in every method. And since that's the rule, I'm going to put a try catch in this method. I don't have anything really valuable to do. So since I don't have anything valuable to do, come on. How likely is something to go wrong? If it goes wrong, I'm just gonna return an empty list. Show of hands, who's written code like that?
Do people want
Okay,
to?
so okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4 honest people in the room?
I'll never admit to it.
I've written lots of bad code. And I acknowledge it because I've grown because of it, right? But at the end of the day, this caused us to quietly have search failing to return results, right? So let's do this. Let's go ahead. I've got this commit, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to approve pull request. Now, would I have, in the real world, would I have approved that pull request? See if somebody else can figure out why the answer is no.
You mean you're the author of the fix?
No. If I was looking at that with the team, right? Does it fix the issue? Right? It fixes the issue, right? We took and fixed what was causing the error, and this should, when the code finishes merging, it should resolve the error, right? Well, what don't we see besides the code fixing here?
Unit test.
Yeah, I didn't change any unit test. How can you fix a bug and not change a unit test?
Easily.
By definition, if my team has bought into unit testing,
Just like that.
if my team has bought into unit testing, and I have a bug in my code, that means one of two things is wrong. I'm either missing a unit test, or I've got a unit test that's wrong. Right? Now, and that's a great way to help build your unit test coverage within your team, right? Because if you acknowledge that within the team, hey, every time we have a bug, right? Yeah, we're going to try and get better about unit testing in general. But if we have a bug, we know something got through us that could and should have been tested. So let's add the test when we fix the bug, right? Let's fix the test when we fix the bug. So if I've got a bug and I've got a pull request to fix the bug, the first thing that I'm going to do when I'm reviewing the pull request, after I make sure that all of the build automation and automated analysis stuff finished and succeeded, because I'm not going to bother looking at something that automated analysis hasn't been done on yet, because that's wasteful time, right? If I catch something that a computer could have caught, I wasted my time. If I've got automated analysis running on that and I pick up the pull request and I glance over and I see, okay, the build finished, which means analysis ran, the check mark's green, now I can start looking at the code, and I'm not looking for stupid things like, did I do spaces or tabs? Did I do braces up or down? Did I format code the way that my team has agreed to format code? Because automated analysis has already caught all that stuff. And I can look and say, does this code make sense? I look at the bug, I look at the code, and I say, do these things make sense together? And the place that I start is I go and I look and I say, I'm gonna look at the test, which I'm gonna pretend there's a test here, because I would have jumped into that test and said, okay, I see what the test is asserting. That makes sense. That describes the way that the code should work. Now let me go look at the code itself and make sure that they achieved that in a way that makes sense, right? They didn't loop through it character by character, writing out to another string or something like that, right? Let's jump back to our pipelines. And you'll notice I've got a completed build. Right. I merged the pull request 4, fixed product search functionality, my build completed. Right? Now, already talked about the build isn't what puts it out onto, isn't what deploys code. What deploys code is the release, and I can see, looking on the release now, that I've got a dev stage that's in process, right? So when I click on that, I can go in and I can see it has downloaded the zip file that we talked about, and right now it's currently waiting for an agent to become available. Sometimes that takes longer than we'd like.
True.
It does. That's another good.
Which is weird because even if you have no builds running, sometimes it takes a really long time.
Well, and part of it depends on what your particular licensing arrangement is.
Yeah.
With your Azure DevOps, right? Do you have a dedicated agent?
Yeah.
Right? If you're in an organization that's bought a pool of dedicated agents, then your constraint, how long are you going to wait for it? Well, when it is one of mine free up.
Right.
If you're taking the from the greater pool, like I'm in this case, I'm using free build agents because they, you know, even though I work at Microsoft, I would still get my account charged if I was using a paid agent, and my boss would ask me why I'm using all these agent minutes if I don't need to be, right? So I use the free agent, and in this particular case, it's causing us to wait for it. I had a hand up.
Yeah, I noticed sometimes, like, so for example, where I work on each release step, whether we're releasing to dev or QA, we have to do like a pre-approval and a post-approval. I notice sometimes when I forget to do the post-approval, I'll be sitting there waiting for an agent, like, oh, why is this is taking a really long time? And then I look at the previous release, I'm like, oh, I forgot to approve the post-release. So that's another possibility.
Yep, that is another possibility, and that's a great way for why they made for what would keep it from going into there in the first place, right? So, and as a matter of fact, while we're waiting for an agent, I will actually go ahead and go over and talk about that. That's a good lead into. I had a pipeline, and you heard Aria mention it before, and I didn't catch your name.
My name is Marwan.
Marwan, okay, and Marwan just brought up the idea of gates coming into and out of tasks, right? He said approvals. Approvals are one kind of gate that can be used to control, right? In this particular case, the things that it control when I go into the deployment of a particular stage, right? I want this to trigger after the initial creation of the release, right? I could say I only want it to come manually, or I could say I wanted it to come after a different stage, right? The first stage in your pipeline is typically going to be triggered on the creation of the release. And outside of that, the most commonly used gate is what's called a pre-deployment approval. Right now, a dev environment isn't usually going to have a pre-deployment approval gate. Normally, what's going to happen is the dev team does not expect that dev environment to remain stable, and there's no expectation that anybody should ever, at any point in time, expect an uninterrupted flow in dev. Right? That's normal case in most. Now, I mean, you should be completely broken? No, right? Because we had a build. The build came clean. The unit tests came clean, right? So there's a reasonable expectation that the software will actually run, but there's nothing to say, hey, don't deploy while I'm in the middle of testing this. Right? It's just going to keep flowing out there. Where pre-deployment approvals first kind of become really important in most environments is a QA environment. Anybody work in the QA department in this group? Okay. Anybody work with testers? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
How much time and effort do they spend setting up really obscure edge test cases?
I never see it, but I imagine they do.
A lot of really good QA analysts can spend hours, if not a complete workday or more, simply setting up for some scenario that they want to test. No better way to ruin their day than when they finally got everything set up and are ready to execute the test, and you go and mess up the environment on them, right? And so in a lot of organizations, this pre-deployment approval is simply, hey, a member of the QA team needs to click off and say, yeah, we know this is about to come in and we're ready for it, right? It's amazing what that can do for the relationship between the development team and the QA team, just a little courtesy like that, right? The other thing that we see being used are deployment gates. And deployment gates it's a newer feature, and it's really kind of cool because it allows us to select from a number of predefined things, right? So I can look and evaluate an ARM template to make sure that if I'm using something called Azure Policy, which this talk is not about, but Azure Policy is a way to make sure that you've got baked into the platform rules about what's allowed on the platform, right? You may have, nobody's allowed to create public IP addresses because you've got something that needs to be run in a secure way and to keep everything rolling, right? It's a way to make sure that the platform is enforcing rules that you then don't have to have a person in security saying, oh, you can't do that because I don't understand it, because the platform is enforcing the important rules to enforce, and that means you don't need a person approving what you're doing because the platform is being taken care of, right? You can invoke an Azure function, right? And if it's invoking an Azure function, what can happen in there? Anybody work with Azure functions? Okay, what does an Azure function do?
One can do anything you want.
Exactly.
C# code.
Exactly.
On the back end, yeah.
C# code in the back end, and you run something in C# and return an HTTP response, and you can make sure that that returns an OK response, right? That means, right, at that point, you can have fairly infinite ability to customize what do I want to have gate this particular stage. Kind of along the same line, invoke a REST API, right? Azure function is intended to be your code, and it's a little cleaner connection to your code. Whereas the REST API, you're simply going to put in a URL and some information about the call, and it's going to make that call. Could that call be an Azure function? Yes, it could. Azure function is just a special case of it. Azure Monitor Alerts and work items is a really cool case, right? If you think about your upper environments, your staging environment, your production environment, right? How cool would it be to say, hey, by the way, we've got all this automation which people were scared to allow us to have, because if we have all this automation, how are we going to make sure that it's really okay to? How are we going to make sure all the documentation's done? How are we going to make sure all the work that was supposed to get done got done? Right? Those are all questions that come out of organizations that are used to controlling things with bureaucracy, that you start talking about introducing automation, and we're going to lose all our control, right? And this allows them to say, you know what? We won't allow a release to go into production unless all of the work items that are connected to that release have a "this has been approved" tag on it, right? That's pretty powerful, because now that allows some process to be injected that can be controlled from an organizational level to meet what makes sense for the organization, but still allow that automation to occur and make sure that all of the approvals are in place, but then it moves. Right? The same thing applies for the manual approval step.
Back to your previous step,
Uh-huh.
on the pre-deployment, what are the ways someone can approve that? Do they get notified with some kind of Azure notification and they hit yes or something, or what?
So what happens is they receive an email,
Okay.
and the email that they receive says, hey, you've got a deployment waiting for you, and they go to the portal and they click approve, right? Now, that REST API call, could it be a call into ServiceNow? Absolutely, right? Could be a call into whatever approval management system that your organization is already using? Absolutely, right? Even if it's something that you wrote yourself 15 years ago, right? It's great. I hook into it and I make the REST call, and I get back a 200 response. It's good to move forward. Make sense?
You can actually specify like what gets returned, and move forward with it or not, or does it just wait 5 minutes and then respond?
Well, again, it's here. It's that 5 minutes is how long it's going to delay between evaluation, right? So it's not, hey, I'm gonna wait 5 minutes and move on. It's I'm gonna wait 5 minutes. I'm gonna evaluate it. Okay, this isn't true yet. I'm gonna wait and check again, right?
For how many times?
What's that?
For how many times?
I don't recall that answer off the top of my head. Let me take a note and I'll get the answer for you.
Do you know if you can pass like pipeline variables through there?
What's that?
Can you pass pipeline variables through there? It's like all the
Oh,
like
so
the $sign.
yeah, let's add a REST API gate. Yes, absolutely. All right, and that's in the headers. You can do the same into the body. So it's going to be pretty customizable. Let's jump back to our release. And we can see now our code has been pushed out to dev. Oh God, don't fail me now. And we fixed the bug. Revenue's flowing. Dollar bill machines pumping out dollar bills, and everybody's happy again. Any questions? No? Yeah.
You mentioned before two interesting things: the wait for getting an agent to do stuff, and
Mhm.
also you mentioned like making your own machine agent. Is
Yes.
that a thing you can do? That's interesting. I just don't know anything about that.
Yeah, so the agent software itself you can download and install the agent on your machine, right? At that point in time, you're providing the compute. So because you're providing the compute, you're not being charged for the compute, right? And that can be your own developer machine. That's a very edge case. That's a special case. Is it something that I might do in a demo to make sure that I never wait for an agent and it appears they're always infinite and available? Maybe, potentially by the partner, right? Is it something I absolutely would do if I'm hacking around and trying to understand something that I don't understand? Absolutely. Is it something I would do to support a production workload? Heck no, never, right? The thing that I would use a custom agent for, right? My own install agent. The situations that I would use that for would be if I have a server on my network because I have an agent that needs to access something on my network that can't be accessed from the cloud, that shouldn't be accessed from the cloud, then I would have a build agent running on my machine or a machine on my network, right? Another example, anybody work for a company that does not allow their source code to be stored in the cloud? You're lucky, they exist, right? And it becomes it becomes a little bit of a challenge to work with. But in those cases, you might have a source control system that's on your network, be it the Azure Devops server, the on-prem version, or something else running Git or another version control that's on your network. Well, you need to at least have an agent on that network as well, right? And then it produces a package that it could then deploy wherever it needs to be deployed, whether it's the servers on your environment, or in this case, you know, where I work in Azure, so all my demos happen to deploy stuff to Azure, right? But that doesn't have to be the target. It can be pointing to something running on a Apache server somewhere on your network. Right? It just doesn't matter as long as you've got a compiler available for it, or can write a shell script to execute the tasks that need to run. You're good to go. So let's take a look real quick. At what happens with the engineering group in Microsoft. So, how many people are work with less than 100 developers? Okay, more than 100? Okay, so there are a few with more than 100. More than 500. Okay. How many developers do you have in your organization? 1,000 something? Okay. So, Microsoft Engineering, how many developers do you think there are?
30,000?
96,000 active
It's
engineers.
really high.
96,000 developers.
Is that on Office 365?
What's that?
Sorry.
No, that's Notepad.
7,700 of them are contributing to open source projects. They have 86,000 deployments per day using our instance of Azure DevOps, which, by the way, we don't have a dedicated instance of Azure DevOps. We sit in the cloud alongside everybody else's, and based on the way that we roll out changes, if there's an oops that's going to have you cussing us, those 96,000 people are going to be cussing us before you are, because it's going to hit their ring first. 372,000 pull requests a month, right? So a lot of code to manage. It's a lot of builds. It's a lot of tests. Or, as a matter of fact, 500 million test executions per day. Yes.
Is that on consumer software, or is that including Azure Fabric?
That is Microsoft software, right? There used to be, and I will say that there are still a couple of like far corner edge cases of teams that have not come over into Azure DevOps, but that's the rare exception, and it's because they're working on something that doesn't change enough for them to have been forced over yet, right? In the last several years, we decided that, hey, we're putting ourselves through what everybody else goes through, and if the tooling isn't good enough for us to use, why are we bothering telling somebody else they should use it? Dog food, right? We're gonna eat our own dog food. All right, so this board right now, we talked through some of the bugs earlier, right? This is a task board. That's the current sprint for one of the engineering teams. And kind of more important than just the list of tasks, is the information that's presented in the dashboard, right? It's, hey, what are the things we're working about? What kind of bugs are we? We've got a special bucket for bugs that aren't related to accessibility. The reason we have a special bucket for things that aren't related to accessibility is because we treat accessibility special, right? We want to make sure that application, you can tell this is a developer tool, right? How can you tell it's a developer tool? Why? Because we've got a special category for bugs that are related to the dark theme, right?
It's a thing these days.
It is a thing, right? And it's a thing that's important to the people who are using the tool that's being produced, right? So if this was a dashboard for Office 365, do you think they would be tracking dark theme bugs?
Hopefully, yes.
No, they wouldn't, right? It's because while it's still important to us, even on Office, as a percentage of the people who use Office, all of a sudden it's not very important, right? And so it's how do I get the information that's going to be important to producing a quality product and making sure that developers know what should be worked on, that stakeholders know what's being worked on, and everybody sees the same picture, right? So that's their dashboarding that one of the teams uses. And again, I want to make sure and make this really clear, all right? Our teams, on Azure DevOps, there are 45 feature teams, right? 45 feature teams. That's 1 to 2 product managers and 10 to 12 engineers focusing as pretty much within the scope of the feature that they've been given ownership of, working with autonomy, right? How within the boundaries are we going to manage our work and delight the customer? Great. Product managers are treated as fully empowered product owners. Who works in Scrum? Okay. Now, of those hands that went up, how many work with truly empowered product owners who are the decider? Oh, that's normal, right? It's normal. Has anybody ever been able to work with a product owner that's truly the decider? It makes an amazing difference when you're in an organization that culturally can support it, right? Because now things can get done. And that product owner truly is empowered to make sure that they're producing the value that they're expected to produce. And the engineers who are working with them understand that they're able to make a difference as a team, and they get really, really protective over producing value, right? I've only been with Microsoft since January. Last 18 months, I would get called before I came to Microsoft by members of the Visual Studio team. Hey, you've come to the conferences, so we've got your names on the cards that got dropped. We know you're a Visual Studio user. We'd like you to take a look at a feature we're thinking about doing and tell us if this is going to be useful, right? It's pretty nice to be able to take part in that type of interaction, and it's really a side effect of the fact that they're running those empowered autonomous teams. Let's take a look real quick at pull requests. The reason I'm starting with pull requests is because to me that pull request really is where that pull request really is where the concept of integration starts in, right? It's, hey, we've got a change that we're wanting to reintroduce into this code base. How does this change get from being proposed into the actual code branch and eventually deployed onto servers? In this case, notice, zoom in. We've got a number of policies that, and again, some of these are mandated by the overarching product team, and some of these are picked by the individual product teams based on the needs of that team. These policies, first, it's everything requires a reviewer, right? That seems like an obvious one, right? Do you guys do pull requests? Okay. Do you require reviewers?
Yeah, We send it out to 3 reviewers, I think 1 needs to approve.
Okay, everybody except for the special guy who's so good that they don't need to have their code reviewed? You have that guy?
That's kind of me.
Okay. Is your code really better than theirs?
I don't know.
Is it really, is it really, okay? Is it really? Is
They've
it?
never seen the box, let's put it that way.
Right.
You stay behind.
I've been that guy too, and I'll say that guy shouldn't exist, right? Because it never fails, never fails. Oh, I'm in a hurry. I'll override the policy, right? It's always going to come back and bite somebody sometime, right? Build has to have a clean build, right? That's kind of a given. We actually deploy to a number of environments to run automated tests in these essentially throwaway environments to make sure that the integration tests, right? Not only our unit tests, but we're also concerned about integration tests passing. This is before we ever even get to accept a pull request. There's some accessibility testing that goes on. All comments resolved. Right? So if somebody says, hey, I don't think you should have done this, well, it at least needs marked resolved, right? So gets pretty complex. Right now, again, this is the 96,000 developers view of how complicated could it possibly get, right? Real world, I get a clean build. I get good coverage on my unit tests. Hopefully some sort of static analysis. Does everybody use static analysis? Anybody use static analysis? Does anybody know what static analysis is? Okay, what's static analysis?
Yeah, it's basically you have a tool to analyze your the code as it is written before you actually run or execute any of it with unit tests or anything like that.
Yeah. So what kind of things can static analysis find? Security bugs? Syntax? Yeah. A lot of times a compiler is going to find your syntax errors, right? Static analysis may find common logic errors. May find, anybody ever forget to close a database connection, right? And it works just fine when you run your tests, right? And it might even work just fine when the QA testers, all 3 of them, are using the application, right? And then Black Friday comes, right? Static analysis can say, hey, you know what? You had an object that implements iDisposable, but you didn't put it in a using statement or call close on it, right? Those types of things. What's that?
Or dispose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Those types of things are things that a machine can get, and if a machine can pick up things like that, it's going to protect you, and it's also going to allow you to act more strategically, right? Because once again, I'm not having to worry about, did this person use tabs or spaces? What are they saying in this code? Is this code clean? Is it readable? Am I going to be able to understand where to go to fix a mistake at 1 in the morning when somebody calls in a bug and it needs to be fixed now, right? And we talked about the approvals before on the pipelines. And we talked about how does that get approved? This is how we get approved, right? In this particular case, we've got a pre-deployment pending. And I'm able to say, notice here, not only am I allowed to just click approve, but I can also tell it, yeah, I'm going to approve it, but I don't want it to go yet, right? I'm going to approve this and say it's okay for this to go ahead and move into the environment at 1 a.m. Because
And it'll tell you.
What's that?
It'll give you an option at that point.
Yeah, so when I say defer for later,
Oh, okay.
it's going to allow me to specify, well, when's later?
Oh, do you have to then go look up UTC?
Yeah. You gotta look up UTC. We should all just use UTC anyway.
Well, it'd be nice if we had a little drop down that said actually.
Yeah.
You could say Eastern time because you live in Indiana.
Yeah, no, that would be nice. Maybe there's a user voice for that.
Probably.
Everybody familiar with user voice? There's two things I like to make sure and point out whenever we talk about products, right? Because we all love to talk about the things that bug us on products, right? Who said developers aren't critical or don't judge?
They don't.
Yeah, we're not judging because the judgment's already been rendered, right? Right. So we're pretty judgy. The nice thing is most of the products have user voice sites where you can go find that thing that really bugs you and see if it bugs someone else too. If it bugs somebody else too, you vote it out.
Upvote.
Because remember we talked about those self-directed product feature teams and the 1 to 2 product managers for each of those teams? What do you think the primary driver for them for what's important enough to be worked on this sprint is? User voice, right? What are people voting up? So definitely become familiar with user voice. The other thing that I would encourage you to become very familiar with is the fact that the documentation is open source. Right? What does that mean? Who likes to complain about something they saw wrong in the docs? I do, right? I stopped complaining about something I saw wrong in these docs about 1.5 years ago when they went open source. I find mistakes in the docs all the time. And I click edit, and I fix it, and I hit submit pull request. Most of my pull requests get accepted. The ones that get rejected, now I'm free to complain about all I want. Because I submitted a pull request and somebody else rejected it, so I can complain, right? So definitely make sure that you're keeping that in mind because you will find mistakes in the docs. The last thing I want to make sure and draw your attention to is a pretty awesome site. And that site is AzureDevOpsLabs.com. AzureDevOpsLabs.com is a bunch of labs with very focused how-to, walking you through different common scenarios and some edge cases too within Azure DevOps. Obviously, a lot of it's going to be focused on pipelines, but there's also going to be some of it that's focused on boards and dashboarding and managing work as well, because it's in context, right? It's if we don't have a way to define what we're going to build and what's important to do next, then it really doesn't matter that we have tooling to run a compiler and execute a test runner and deploy code, right? So it's all in context and it needs to be looked at holistically. But definitely would encourage you to go to AzureDevOpsLabs.com. And another URL that I wanted to share with you is aka.ms/DevOpsMSFT. And what that is that's a site that has some high-level conceptual stuff, the touchy-feely DevOps stuff, the cultural pieces that really matter, but it also has some really good prescriptive guidance on how we've approached different problems, right? A great example of that is we couldn't move at the pace that we move at with product updates if it weren't for feature flags. Does anybody use feature flags? Okay, okay. Who does not know what feature flags are? Okay, great. So feature flags are essentially a way to control whether a particular feature or particular piece of functionality in your application is active through configuration. You turn it on and off. It means if you're really building software that's tightly focused with the single responsibility principle, then you may have an algorithm processor that's job is to run a specific calculation, right? And now it's time to change the calculation. If you're using feature flags and kind of driving with that, it's very likely that you're going to add a new processor with the new version of the calculation, and then in using your feature flags for your dependency injection, you'll decide, do I spin up the old one or do I spin up the new one? And what that allows you to do then is always roll forward, and you can put that new algorithm into production weeks before it needs to be active. And on the day it's supposed to go active, the configuration changes and the new one gets picked up, and oh my gosh, we made a big mistake and shouldn't have done that. Great, flip the config, and now it's using the old one again, right? And we have to be set up to do that. Matter of fact, a lot of the products, Azure DevOps itself being one of them, allows you to go in and toggle your own feature flags to say, you know what, I want to, anybody been prompted, do you want the new experience? You want to see the new experience? We've changed the way boards looks. Do you want the new experience? Well, you click yes, and that's for you setting that feature flag to on while the rest of the world is still getting the old one. And then they can figure out whether you hate it, whether you use analytics to determine whether you're being frustrated, whether you're finding what you need to find, so they can take and fine tune that before they make it available to everybody else. Right? That's one example of something that we had to really embrace to move as fast as we do at the scale that we do. And those types of things are all discussed in our DevOps site. That's that public DevOps site. Any questions?
This is a great page.
Yes.
What's your path to Microsoft?
I'm sorry?
What is your path to Microsoft?
My path to Microsoft? I'm not sure that I understand the
So
context
you've
of the
only been
question.
here since what, January?
Yes, I've been with Microsoft since January.
Okay, what did you do before that?
Oh, what I did before that, okay. So, well, I've spent 20 years in the industry. I'm doing a combination. About half of it was spent in big corporate IT and about half of it was spent in consulting.
Okay, since limited background in the company itself, what can you tell me about the security on Azure, and has it ever been hacked in a ransomware attack?
I'm not aware of Azure itself having ever been hacked in a ransomware attack. There's a possibility that somebody running servers, say VMs, would have left them in an unsecure configuration. Now, there's a whole compliance section from as far as an industry compliance standards that Microsoft, and are you familiar with the shared responsibility model?
Not yet.
Okay, so shared responsibility, if you're taking a look going down the path of trying to understand whether your security needs are being met, and I'm being real careful not to go too deep here because this isn't an Azure talk and I'm trying to be mindful of that. But if you are evaluating against your security needs, the first thing you need to do is go out and take a look at our shared responsibility model. Because what that does is it really clearly delineates on a service by service level what things the customer is responsible for securing and what things Microsoft is responsible, right? So for example, on an app service where you're running your own custom code, right, there are certain things that you have to make sure that you're doing, right? Using secure libraries, not leaving yourself a back door to be able to get in with your dog's name if you type it on Tuesday,
Are
right?
there any white papers on this matter?
What's that?
Are there any white papers on this matter?
Yeah, take a look at the shared responsibility model, and there's an entire section of the Azure site that's dedicated to really going deep into the security characteristics. And every service also has a complete publication to show the security characteristics of that particular service.
And to add to that, whenever you're deploying to a server, regardless of whether it's your infrastructure or somebody else's, you should understand how to secure your servers and how secure they are. So you shouldn't go, well, it's Microsoft, everything's protected. Not that that is what you're saying. But for example, and I won't go too deep into it, but in Azure, if you spin up, say, a cloud service or a virtual machine, well, you shouldn't have remote desktop enabled. If you do, you should have expiring remote desktop accounts. It shouldn't use the default username. It should be on a different port. Things that would make you less vulnerable to an attack. But anything you do to increase your attack surface is going to make you more vulnerable. And when you have Microsoft being the data center and that's the only difference, well, I mean, you're still fully responsible for your own security.
The principle of defense in depth applies, right? Any other questions? No? Great. Well, I appreciate you to spend some time. Who's going to give lightning talks?
I'm going to give a lightning talk.
Got his hand up.
Lightning talk? Who else?
I'm so serious, right? This is such a
okay. Mike's going to do one.
This is such a great opportunity for the community.
You should do one on Azure DevOps.
Yeah, I just did one.
What is it again?
How about a lightning talk?
What day?
It's next. It's the first Wednesday of next month. So whatever that is.
Oh, the first Wednesday of next month. Oh.
Of next month.
Yeah.
You can't wait, can you?
I thought it was.
So that there's another volunteer.
No, that wouldn't be the first Wednesday anymore.
Alright.
It'd be weird if I said the first Wednesday of next week.
There is a first Wednesday.
That's true. That's true. I'm just thinking about. There's someone who would think that.
So it's serious though. I think it builds community, right? I am not. Obviously, I'm not somebody who has made a career of being a professional speaker. There's topics I like to talk about. I like to share information, and there's things that every person in here knows something that the rest of the people in here doesn't know, that they can share. Thank you.